Good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Friends of the Key West Library's 5th free virtual lecture of the 2021 series, including Rita Troxel, Key West, and Key West sculptor John Martini. I'm Roberta Islip, the president of the Friends. The Friends was organized to provide financial and volunteer support for the activities of the Key West Public Library. We raise money through memberships, book sales, and donations. All money raised through memberships goes to support the library's annual wish list, including staff training, children's library services, and special purchases to support the library's mission. So please do consider joining the Friends. You'll see that on the homepage of the lecture series. So with no further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce John Martini. He is well known, living and working in Key West and France. He moved to Key West in 1976. While working odd jobs, he earned his 50-ton master's captain's license and then opened a sailing school at the same time as maintaining a sculpture studio in the abandoned Truman Annex, which is no longer abandoned. His sculptures are shown in galleries and museums across the world, including our own Lucky Street Gallery in Key West. So welcome, John.
Thanks so much to Friends of the Library, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with my friend of many years, Rita Troxel. And with that, we'll just go on. Also, I understand there's several contributors to the book who are with us tonight too. So special welcome to them. So I will introduce you to Rita Troxel.
Hi everyone in virtual land.
It's Zoom world out there.
Zoom world.
So Rita, I was thinking that it would be a really nice start to have you read something, and read in particular Mango Season, which I think sets a really nice tone. And then after that, we can explore some other subjects. But
okay, I'll read a few paragraphs of Mango Season. Just
thank you.
We won't go through the whole story.
No, yeah, a reading to set the tone. Thank you.
Okay. Remember the time? Oh, well, I should say Mango Season. I wrote this. This was my one of my stories. So, remember the time we laughed that knowing laugh. The air is hot. It smells of jasmine, sweet and thick. The sea wraps around us and leaves the taste of salt on our lips. It holds secrets of days past, tales told and retold, truths and lies. Remember the time? Yeah. I remember. This is the season when black funnel clouds spring from the horizon, winding their tails hypnotically toward the sea. They touch the salt water, grabbing up ocean into their chaos, becoming amazing and powerful. Then, lazily, they disconnect from their lovers and coil back up into the clouds. This is the time of racing barefoot across the hot, hot sand, jumping into the almost but not quite cool Atlantic Ocean, shallow and clear. This is a time when the water is like mirrored glass. As you glide across in a boat, the illusion of sliding off the end of the earth feels like a heroin high. There are sea turtles mating on the surface, and below, large, elegant rays fly through the water like prehistoric birds through the deep blue air. As the weather heats up, the pace slows down. It is an easier, slower time. Hours spent having meals with friends, Saturdays on a sandbar playing bocce, soaking in the turquoise water. It washes over us and takes with it the troubles of the world. Does any other place really exist? I say no.
Well, I think that really brings us to the essence of people's connection to Key West, your initial connection, and experiencing the environment, and then everything else kind of spins along from that experience. Well, maybe why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to Key West, and give us a little backstory.
Okay, well, I first came when I was on Christmas break from college, and that was Christmas of 1972, New Year's 73. We drove down. That was a time when I had no idea that Key West was 130 miles from the mainland. I thought you go to Miami and then you cross a bridge and there you are in Key West, but no. So we had a memorable ride down the Keys. As you can imagine, back in those days, it was one very narrow lane in each direction. And in fact, you would hit at times the mirror of the other vehicle going in the other direction. If we had a van, it was a big truck, bam, a little unnerving. So it was myself and the guys from the theater department and one friend from the history department. We came into Key West, shall we say, in an altered state of mind, perhaps. And of course, we're in love with it. There were black cats everywhere. We thought it was like a magical place. And we said, well, we're coming back here to start a theater. And so that was the idea. And when we graduated college, we came the following December with the intent to start Green Street Theater, which we did.
And so you came back and you started Green Street Theater. There must have been a big leap from arriving altered to actually the nuts and bolts of starting a theater.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, we camped out on what we call the Fingers up on Summerlin Key for 3 months. Myself, my late husband Roddy, and his 2 little kids, Sean and Scott. 3 months in a van, and then eventually came into Key West and got started. Peter Pell and Jimmy Russell, who owned Key West Handprint Fabrics, and Roddy's partner, then Jay. We all started the theater. We secured a place. Peter and Jimmy supplied the fabric for the seats. And I was on Green Street, right across from Sloppy Joe's. And I think what now is sort of a little sundry shop was maybe the Key West Citizen or next door to the Key West Citizen at one time.
I think it was next to the Key West Citizen, yeah.
Yeah, and then Tennessee Williams got involved because he was a good friend of Peter and Jimmy's. And he rewrote the ending, excuse me, of Suddenly Last Summer for us. And because it was Tennessee Williams, people came from all over. I mean, lots of people from LA and New York and the New York Times. And it was, I mean, we were 22, 23 years old. We couldn't quite believe what was happening.
How long was the Green Street Theater actually in existence?
Well, we were on Green Street for a few years, and then we moved over to the Navy base. And after that, we became the theater in residence at the Tennessee Williams Fine Arts Center. Our former professor from college, Bill Prosser, he became director of the Tennessee Williams Fine Arts Center and, brought us on as a theater in residence. So I think the theater went until 1982. Maybe as Green Street Theater.
And did it not eventually turn into the Red Barn? I mean, is that not the same?
No, the Red Barn went and started when we went over as theater in residence at Tennessee Williams Fine Arts Center. The Red Barn began on, behind the Women's Club on Duval Street. So it was 2 separate entities, although most of the people with the Red Barn had originally come down, like Mimi McDonald was my college roommate, and Joy Hawkins came down, and John Wells, and they all worked at the theater before starting Red Barn.
But Mimi and Gary didn't come down originally. They weren't part of the original Green Street group, were they?
They were a part of the original Green Street group, not the first year. I think they came down the second year, maybe.
And what were were there any other theaters in town at that time? The waterfront, I guess.
The waterfront was up and running. They did not. They were not thrilled to see us. the hippies coming to start a theater.
And so then you were involved with the theater, and then when Green Street switched over and it came to its end, you did, if I remember correctly, you did various jobs in Key West. You had various occupations.
Yes, I worked for you.
You did, that's right. Yeah, well, very few people are so lucky as to work for me. And then you ended up with an illustrious career as the all-important film commissioner.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a great career for me. I'm very good at things that are not boring.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. It was plenty of film work, and you kept people busy. So I think we'll talk about how the book came to be, but maybe do you want to do another reading?
I can, yeah, either way, sure.
Yeah, I think we could interspice some conversation with readings.
Okay, so let's see here. How about, I'll read a bit from 1974 by Guy de la Valdine. Guy is a very dear friend. And, you know, I'll just preface by saying I never imagined when I started this that anybody was, I'm sorry for the dinging. I can't do anything about that. So ignore it.
I thought I was digging, so good, it's on you.
Anyway, I never imagined that a published writer would write for the book. So I was reluctant to ask in the beginning, but Guy wrote this more recently. Specifically, I asked him in the past year and a half, and he wrote this. He is a wonderful, wonderful writer, and like I said, a dear friend and fellow fisherman for my husband. Not so much me. I try.
Rita, I wonder if just quickly if we should just interject a little story that this is a collection that you're curated of 52 writers. I think it was 70, essentially little memoirs and reflections upon their time here. So we didn't really explain that beforehand. So please go ahead and read.
Yes, and I should say that the stories, the deal was first person, nonfiction. It had to be your story. You had to be there. Okay. So Guy's story, 1974. We had already been fishing for tarpon for 3 years in the clean, shallow waters below Key West. In those days, you'd see at most 2 other boats during the day, usually belonging to the Montgomery brothers. Weekends would drag down a handful of guides from Miami and a small group of do-it-yourselfers. But Summerland Key was usually as far as they drove. The fishing in those days was spectacular, from the Everglades to below Key West to the Marquesas. Our original group included the writer Tom McGuane, the poet Jim Harrison, the landscape artist Russell Chatham, and me. However, after Tom wrote and directed the film 92 in the Shade, he moved for the part of the year to Los Angeles. The 3 remaining close friends and anglers, Jim Harrison would fly down from Michigan, Russell Chatham from Montana, and I, who drove down from Palm Beach, met pretty much every year for a decade to fly fish for tarpon. We were all young, 30s, loved food, pretty women, and large fish that jumped high out of the water when hooked. We rented a house in downtown Key West from mid-May to mid-June every year, and only once in all that time had to relocate to the airport area. Out there, the mass of hippies wasn't as inclined to invade our rental every evening, not only the girls, but their skinny boyfriends. We knew that they referred to us as the fat boys, and we considered it a badge of honor. None of the 3 of us were actually fat, but each in his own way was big. For a certain crowd, when the fat boys were in town, the party was on.
Great. You know, which made me just remember that the movie Tarpon, I don't know if people are familiar with it, that group plus Richard Ruddigan and a couple local guides. It's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing film, and it ties in nicely with that story. I just remembered that.
Yes. Guy made that movie, Tarpon, actually. Yes.
Yeah. And it's not only a beautiful look at the flats and the backcountry during that time, but those are several illustrious early 70s people. I think the film was made in 73. So tell us about the book. How did this where did this come from? What What was the motivation?
Well, as in the first story that I read, remember the time, whenever we were with, various different groups of people, whenever I was with various different groups of people, it was always, oh, do you remember? Yeah. I remember. And it's like, no, it didn't go that way. It went this way. And at a point, I just said, we have to write this down. We're not getting any younger, and we're going to forget things. And clearly we don't always agree as how things went down. So this started 16 years ago. And I just began this was before social media. So, I talked to my friends and said, hey, you want to write a story for this book that I have this idea for? And I emailed people, and, and stories were coming in. And then I asked my friend, Jamie Alcroft, if he would write a story, and did he know Mac Dryden, how to get in touch with Mac, because Mac and Jamie had a comedy team. Mac and Jamie, hilarious comedy team. And Jamie said, my friend Dee Dee West, she's doing a blog and people are writing stories and it's called Concreticity. Why don't you talk to her? So I called Dee Dee. And she said, yeah, sure. Let me put the word out there and see if anybody would like to contribute to your book. And people, yes, people did. And the word passed. The Coconut Hotline was in full steam. And I got one story from Wendy Sheridan, who was living in Amsterdam, in the mail. I was like, oh my God, I have a story from Amsterdam. This is so cool. And Tony Yanis, who was a Key West commissioner, and so funny. And I came home to find, his stories in my mailbox, typed out. It was before, some people could email, but I got a lot of snail mail stories. And that was the seed for the beginning of the book. It was not easy getting people to write back then. I mean, people say they want to write a story.
Right.
Is completely different than getting people to actually sit down and write a story.
Well, with talking about Key Westers from the 70s and 80s, I'm sure it's a lot like herding cats anyway to organize. So did you choose people to contact, or did it just kind of happen organically?
It happened organically. I mean, I chose everybody I came across to contact, and then they told other people, and word just spread.
So you've been sitting on these stories. I know my story I wrote 16 years ago. I wouldn't even recognize. I mean, and the first time I saw it was in the book again, actually. So it was kind of a surprise.
Well, Jamie did. I mean, the stories were, as John will know, his story was not exactly a story. It was more like questions and answers that he had done for an interview. And Jamie did the lion's share of editing these stories. And also we had to even them out. I mean, there were incredibly well-written stories, and there were great stories that were not so well-written. And so we had to make it even, so you didn't have a lot of, this is so beautiful, and this is John's story is an interview, and what's that?
Wait a minute now.
It's a very good story. It's a very good story.
Yeah, I would expect it is, as a matter of fact. So did you reject any stories?
I did reject some stories. I rejected my daughter's story recently. Jessie, yes. But her story can be saved for another future book that I have in mind.
Talk about future plans after.
Okay, we'll talk about future plans later. And sometimes there were stories that were, I mean, if they were defamatory, or maybe cringe for one reason or another, I kind of left them out. And if we had too many repeats of the same, I mean, a lot of these stories interconnect, and it's very funny to see other people's take on it, but you couldn't have too many of the exact same story. So
yeah, I think it's a wide range of experiences that are, and it's funny because you could plug yourself into different little groups. Even at that time, you didn't know there were just, you knew people, you knew the group, you didn't know the people necessarily, but
Right.
you could really plug yourself in. You could almost recognize everybody from the back. As a matter of fact, it was such a small population. And so you had these stories, you've been collecting them for 16 years, and then all of a sudden, bam, we have a book.
Well, I worked on them all along. I mean, I had, you know, I mean, I did a lot of typing, I did a lot of editing, I did a lot of spelling correction, and I just was so busy with work. And finally I said, you know, when I retire, that's it, because I had promised all these people who wrote all these stories, you know, they put time and effort into it. And I wanted to keep my promise of making this into a book. And so once I retired, I put out an email and I said, hey guys, I'm going to do this. This is finally going to happen. And so we started working on it about, now it's been maybe almost 2 years, I think. And Jamie said he was willing to edit, because I don't consider myself a writer or an editor, and I needed somebody's help with that. And like I said, he did a good part of that. And then I talked to my friend Lynn Bentley Kemp, who is an amazing photographer and had designed a couple of books, and she was willing. I don't think she had any idea the amount of months she was getting into, but she made a beautiful, beautiful book.
The book really is beautiful. I mean, it just feels good. It feels good in your hand, and it's just it's a great book full of great memories. And well, maybe do you feel like reading? You want to try reading another?
Okay. Okay. So by popular demand from my Key West friends, I will read J.C. Hour, known to me as Chris. I'll read a part of his story.
What a great story that is, too. It's a good one.
Yes, it is. And I guess I will set this up by saying that Chris has been invited to escort two friends of his, sophisticated, intelligent, beautiful women, to a party being given to honor Tennessee Williams for his opening at the Tennessee Williams Fine Arts Center, while Green Street Theater was a theater in residence. Although was
this the opening of the theater, or was this the opening of his play?
Oh, the opening of his play. Yes, the opening of his play. And so the girls picked him up, the ladies, I should say. But, and so I will just come in midway here. Sorry, there's something in my throat. Okay. Tennessee Williams, being the guest of honor, took his seat at the head of the table, with me seated to his right, although at the absolute opposite end of the table. Appetizers were served, and as I gazed down upon my duck pot au feu, I realized I had no desire for food. However, my appetite for Tanqueray and tonic was insatiable. Mr. Williams was now having a wonderful time, filling the room with laughter and clever conversation. I was also having a very fine time, as was everyone seated around the table. This was a joyful celebration of life, and I was pleased to be a part of it. Once the meal was completed, the table was cleared and each guest was presented with coffee and a slice of key lime pie. Our host rose from his seat and tapped lightly upon his wine glass with a spoon, thus asking for quiet. As I turned to hear what he had to say, a flock of screeching blue fluorescent birds came swooping down the table straight at me. They were huge birds with bright blue neon-tipped wings and piercing red-hot eyes. They were upon me in an instant with their razor-sharp talons fully exposed and ready to rip me to shreds. I leaped from my seat, screaming the scream of death, while beating the beaked bastards off of me with my fist. Diving to the floor, I desperately tried to crawl underneath the table, but it was too late. One of the feathered fuckers landed directly upon me. Fighting for my life, I ripped a wing from the body, jumped to my feet, and stomped its head to bits. The airborne assholes were fluttering and flapping everywhere, and some of the dinner guests were starting to panic. I could see the confusion on their faces and fear in their eyes as I raced past them. I ran helter-skelter around the table with the big blue beast squawking, flying, and zooming right behind me. I ran out of the room. I ran out of the house. I ran into the street, and the birds vanished into the night sky. I looked everywhere, but they were gone. Collapsing to the curb, I started to cry. I was shaking uncontrollably while holding my head in my hands and trying desperately to catch my breath. What the fuck? What the fuck was all I could say. I kept repeating these words over and over until I heard a voice respond. What the fuck? The second voice chimed in saying, what the fuck? Raising my head from my hands, I looked up to see the girls. They were looking down at me as if to say, what the fuck? Raising my head from my hands, I looked up to see the girls. I just read that, and they looked down at me. The instant our eyes met, we started laughing. We laughed and laughed and laughed until the three of us were quite hysterical, which, as you may know, people under the influence of hallucinogens are quite prone to do.
That is so good. What imagery. That was a good story. And Tennessee Williams was such a presence. You know, it's pretty amazing. You know, Key West just accepts people. And I can just remember him walking down Duval Street with his little cat cap on. And it was life. It's interesting. Drugs play a pretty big part in an awful lot of these stories, both sort of commercially and personally. I mean, I guess that's indicative of the ages. Did you? Am I making that up, or did I?
No, you're not making it up. I mean, drugs changed Key West. Duval Street, it was a sleepy town still at that point, even though the hippie invasion had happened. And there was Green Street Theater, but it was very quiet. I mean, the town was from Front Street to, I don't know, Caroline Street. No, maybe as far up as Fleming Street, I guess.
It stopped at the 5 and 10.
At the 5 and 10. And we had stories. I mean, we would do the rounds of the bars, which were the Monster and Captain Tony's and Delmonico's, which were all within, half a block of each other.
Yeah, like the first two on the block. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And stores, I think you remember, stores were shuttered at that time, just empty. And drug money, much of Duval Street and Front Street, shops were built with drug money.
Yeah, and mostly 20s, if I remember correctly from the time.
20s.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing time, and but also I think drugs played a big role personally. I mean, in a personal life, there was a lot of shared experiences, and there was always the line at the back rooms of the bars and everything. And I think we survived out of that. And the hippie evasion and the gays. I mean, the switch from the military, when the military left, was a really big transition. I think that this generation transitioned it pretty nicely. Pretty
nicely, and it's true. I mean, when all my gay friends, when all the gay people started to come down, it brought so much to the town.
Yeah, it really did. It was so multicultural, if you can. I mean, in the sense of cultures, between the locals and the conks and the Cubans and the gays and hippies, and it really worked, and it really expanded Duval Street. And I guess we have to talking about that period, about the AIDS. We don't really talk about it, but about what a huge impact.
Oh my God.
What a huge impact AIDS had, and how devastating it was to Key West, and what a sense of loss. We lost so many artists and entrepreneurs and people who had built and put their heart and soul into the town. And that was a difficult a very difficult moment in this story, in the story of this generation. Well, Rita, I don't know, we have we have some time. Do you want to read another one, or do you want to?
Well, I guess
we can talk about the future a little bit. And
we could talk about the future. Well, I can read another sort of drug story that is from the other side of it. And this is by Frank Brownell, who is an excellent writer. He was a reporter at the time in Key West. And this story is inside and underneath the Bubba Bus trials, my view from the courtroom. And I'll just read a tiny bit of this so you get a sense of, yes, there was drugs and there was fun and there was a lot of play, but sometimes the shit got real.
Yeah. Well, there were definitely dark undercurrents. There's no question about it.
Definitely dark undercurrents. So this is very famous. This period of time, the Bubba Bus trials, is a very famous period in Key West history for, no matter what. And certainly for those of us who lived here, it was eye-opening. So I will start. Try to imagine a criminal case in which the federal government recruits an admitted drug smuggler and terrorist, turns him into an undercover agent, takes the information he provides to indict more than 24 people, then makes him the star witness in a high-profile trial, only to see him arrested right out of the witness box for not telling the whole truth about his myriad illegal activities. And even though such an unlikely sequence of events might prove difficult to imagine, that is exactly what happened in United States of America versus Raymond Casamayor et al., the so-called Bubba Bust of the mid-1980s, which eventually resulted in the convictions of the former Key West Deputy Chief of Police and 11 other defendants on a variety of drug-related charges. The verdict, in essence, confirmed the government's allegations that for many years, the Key West Police Department had been operated as part of a continuing criminal enterprise, frequently serving as a drop-off point for drugs and cash, while simultaneously providing protection for smugglers and dealers. Nevertheless, in order to secure what was just a partial victory against the Casamayor organization, 10 out of 26 people initially charged in 2 indictments were subsequently found not guilty. Prosecutors had to rely on the word of one Hector Serrano, who had distributed as much as $30 million worth of cocaine in Key West before turning against his former business associates when he was arrested in 1983. Shortly thereafter, Serrano had agreed to help obtain incriminating evidence against Casamayor and other members of the conspiracy, which had led to the twin indictments in the early summer of 1984.
Yeah, that was quite a time. It was definitely sort of a cops and robbers feel down here. I remember being at the Sugarloaf Lodge, and one half of the bar was reserved for the smugglers and the other half for the DEA. And then they both made big, often ran for the pay telephone, which seemed critical to both of their. Hang up and call me on the landline. Yeah. And that was pre-cell phone, so which would have made it successful.
Phone booths.
So I think your book has been pretty darn successful, from what I can tell. There seems to be a pretty big demand, and so you've done a first edition.
I've done first edition.
From what I understand, it's close to being sold. The first edition that's fabulous.
It is.
And are you finding the people who are purchasing it to be people who were from that period, or a broader range of people, or? Well,
a lot of friends of the writers have purchased the books, but there are a lot of people who have visited Key West. I mean, there's a lot of people who have visited but never lived here that have purchased books. There are people who I don't know who send me emails and messages on Facebook about it. And, the ultimate, everybody has their take as to why they like it. I mean, it's a piece of history. It is a piece of history of Key West that has not been addressed other than all of us talking about it. Mm-hmm. And my cousin, who I know is on this, was on this Zoom, and I will paraphrase, said something to the effect that it reminded him of being in college, only it was a lot more people and lasted a lot longer, and really made him wish that he had lived down here. And the sentiment of really having wished they had been here to experience this. That is always the last line of the messages that I get from people who did not live here. I mean, you know, it was a crazy romance that we had. And I don't think, I certainly was too naive to understand what the effect Key West was having on me and what effect I might be having on Key West. And, you know, I came here, I thought I'd be here. So I was like, give it 7 years. Well, 45 years later.
Well, most people only say give it 3 months. So you had at least an extended, and then they'll still hear 40 years later. Yeah, I feel we were very, very lucky to come here at that time. I think that every generation, and I think that there are generations in Key West life, you know, there's a turnover of people. There's the people who come here for one reason or another and manage to stay on. I think that every generation feels like that their time when they discovered Key West is a very special time.
I hope so. I hope so, because it's a very special place. You know, even now, it's not the same as it was, but it's still a wonderful place to be.
Well, what's interesting to me is that period was a period of transition. I mean, it was a real period of transition with the military leaving, and we're creating a whole new town. And I see it's kind of I see now that we're in sort of a transitional period. So I'm anxious to see what develops. But I think that one has to know one's history, as the famous line goes, to pursue a future, a good future, a sustainable future. So I think that we're in another interesting time, and we're here to see it, which is great. And I mean, the other thing that's true about our generation is we're getting older, and I'm happy to have the stories told. So there'll be a second edition.
There will be a second printing. Yes, there'll be a second edition we're working on. There are quite a few copy edits. Sorry. I'll apologize now that we're in the process of correcting before we send this off to the printer, you know, one more time, at least one more time, hopefully more than one more time. And yes, and we had to postpone at the studios of Key West. We were going to have a big book signing and the writers reading from their stories and just chatting with people and telling tales. And that was supposed to be on April 5th, but because of COVID, we have postponed that to November 19th. So I have to make sure I have books for that. And at that point, hopefully everyone will be vaccinated and everybody can come, because I know a lot of the writers want to come down, and I'm so excited to see them. I mean, working on this book has been such a reconnection. It's so important to me. I'm going to get teary-eyed. And, you know, I want to see everybody in person. I want to be able to hug them.
Did you know most everybody? So there's 51 writers. Yes. And 72 stories, and do you personally know them, or just know of them, or did one lead to another? Did one writer say, "Oh, you should contact Joe or Bob"? Or
yes, that happened. I know a lot of the people. I certainly knew of the majority of the people, but there were some people that I didn't know at all, and I didn't hang out with at all. So, that was wonderful that, through word of mouth and through Synchronicity, Dee Dee's site, we all connected and this came together.
So, all right. So now we're at, obviously there's people who wish they had sent their stories, or were there people actually who sent stories who decided not to print them because their life had changed, or their concept of what was right had changed?
Yes, there was one person, I won't go into it. They just felt their story sort of made them cringe rereading their story. And of course, I wish it was in here because I thought it was a lovely story, but that's not my decision.
Uh-huh.
And so yes, I mean, there were many people that didn't remember having written a story at all. I mean, 15 years later, it's like, I wrote a story. What was the story? Would you send it to me?
Well, that was exactly my response. Like, oh, I wrote a
Yes,
story.
yes.
And so people were the people when they read their stories, it kind of brought them back to a different time. And
Yes, it's very, for those of us who lived here, I think it's very emotional. It is for me. I mean, when I start reading it, and now I'm rereading for copy edits, and, I just go down the rabbit hole. I start reading, and I've had people call me up and say, I got my book. It's great. I have one beef with you. And I'm like, oh my God, no, I spelled something wrong. And it's like, okay, what is it? You've ruined my life. I can't put the book down. I'm getting nothing done. And I understand that. I understand that. It's because I do it myself.
It's definitely riveting. And I suspect that it even for people who weren't here or didn't experience that it's a pretty riveting read as well. I mean, it really opens a door into a small moment in a small place. And it's a place that I mean, Key West is a place that I think has a connection with the country just has a connection with Key West. There's a love out there for whatever reason for Key West and empathy and attraction. So the next book, you're going to do another?
Wow. I know people want me to. I know people they have stories, and I'm trying to take a breath and, rest for a bit, but yes, I have a concept now. So
I can tell
now
you
that
don't
I
want to,
have a concept, what, John?
you don't want to share this concept? I'm beginning to think.
Okay. Well, yes. I mean, I will share. Okay. So my thought.
Share what you're comfortable with, but it might generate some interest in terms of people who might want to contribute also.
Yes, that is true. Well, I think that there are parts of Key West that are left out of the book, that are not in the book. Now, not that I didn't try and ask people, but it's one thing to be interviewed. It's another thing to ask them to write the story. So, there were friends. I wanted to get more things from the 60s, from the older people that I knew that were born here. And it just didn't come to fruition. There are all the people in the Bahama Village. I mean, the Junkanoos. I mean, great stories out there that I would like to capture. So I would like to include that. There are other great stories from people from our generation that there are more stories. There are more of those stories. And then, what really excites me also is the next generation, our issue, as the British would say. People like my daughter, who is a very good writer. And I would love to work with her in curating stories from Robin and Cayman and Amber, and
from the people who had to live with us, the kids who
had to live with us,
Yeah. Well, not only that, but I might interject here that Rita raised a wonderful daughter, and she was a single mother, and she did a absolutely incredible job. And Jessie is a wonderful person and a great writer. And a lot of those kids came out of Key West High, and they did really well. And that's a great generation. And there are people now that are opening, theaters and restaurants, and they're Arlo, the Haskells, and Queenship. All that's a great generation. It's going to be a great generation. They're really doing a wonderful job. So I'd love to. So I think we did okay. I mean, not me personally, but we as a generation.
We did okay. I think it was a great, Key West was a wonderful place to grow up. There was freedom and there was creativity, and the kids were included. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see the kids went to everything. Pacific Orchestra was playing, or somebody was playing. The kids are there. The kids are there as infants in rehearsals, falling asleep. on the seats or under the seats at rehearsals. It was a very artistic, exciting, intellectual, the writers that were here. I mean, it was a very, very exciting time to grow up in Key West.
And yeah, I kind of regret not having grown up in Key West, although maybe I will eventually grow up in Key West. I'm not sure, but to be a kid in Key West, probably not. To be a kid in Key West must have been just remarkable at any time. But they're good kids. So yeah, I'd love to see what their take is. Well, maybe I'm not sure if we'll see.
You might be horrified at what they think of us.
And yeah, so who knows?
But we'll tell it. I mean, it will be the same rules. First person nonfiction, got to be true.
Yeah, whatever the truth is.
Whatever.
I think we're getting down to. I think you have something else you wanted to read.
Oh,
or anything else? No, is there anything else we should talk about? Is there something we missed that we should converse about? We got a couple minutes yet.
Gosh. If there's anything,
there's going to be a second. There's going to be a second. There's going to be a second edition, and we're going to be working on another. So there were a lot of people that regretted not giving you, or said, "Oh, I've got a story; it should be in it." Or
yes, and a few people that are not happy with me because their stories are not in it. Which was, there was no intent there. There was no intent of leaving anybody out. It's just, I didn't ask, or I didn't get the story on time, or I didn't see the story. I didn't know about the story. Things happen. And so I know there are people who would like to contribute, and, I would certainly welcome that. I think I would like to give other people a chance. I mean, we've all written. And I would like to give the people who, haven't had an opportunity to write their stories.
What was the TV show? There's a million stories out there, and for a small island, there's probably 2 million stories out there.
Right.
And also, the book has got some great photographs, which just feed right into the narrative. And it was really nicely put together. The photographs are really nicely integrated into the book, and you'd forgotten that it was black and white.
Yes, going through the photos, trying to find negatives or slides or pictures. Many of these Jamie Alcroft took. He is a wonderful photographer. Then Lawson Little was kind enough to contribute his beautiful black and whites. Mostly we have his of famous people. And
it's interesting too. So you had one or two we have such a great literary community here. I mean, an amazing literary community, which has been through the time. When I think about the people that I've had access to, either at one time or another, it's pretty remarkable. Key West is just a remarkable place, and we're lucky. So John, what do we got?
Are we out of time?
We've got a few minutes. Yeah.
I would like to read Larry Grossman's poem before we conclude, but I think I would like you to talk a little bit about, Truman Annex and the artists. We had writers and we had the theater people, but there are also these amazing artists who had studios before Truman Annex became what it is today. You had a studio there.
I did, and it was I refer to it as a golden age in Key West. But so Truman Annex, when I arrived, the city. I'll do a quick story about it. The military moved out, and when the military moved out, it was like a neutron bomb went off. They just left. There was still plates in the cafeteria. There was bowling pins in the bowling alleys, and they just left, and they turned it over to the city. To a separate little kind of commission redevelopment agency. I can't remember what it was called. Anyway, who had control of it. And they, which turned out to be fabulous, they didn't have any money to do anything with the project. They just started renting spaces out, and the place was full of spaces. So the administration building, which is now the condo building, there must have been 30 photographers, artists, painters, Stephanie Sanchez, Dalva Duarte, Rio Demo, just an amazing array. It was a community. It was a real community. And some writers had offices there. And then on the grounds, there was a group that they'd go out in these it was a survival group, where you could go on a vacation and prove your mettle. they'd go out in these open boats for 3 or 4 weeks in the backcountry. You'd see them off sailing in the backcountry. And it was a youth program, and it was small businesses and machine shops. It was just really wonderful. And Zachary Taylor was our beach because there was a gate. And it was actually known as the nude beach at the time, which tells you how long time ago it was. It's hard to contemplate that thought now, actually. So unfortunately, the city was not able to maintain it. They just couldn't do it, and it got sold eventually, and changed the whole thing. But it was just a wonderful. I had probably 30,000 feet of studio space. And I think I was paying $65 a month at the time for it, and everybody was in the same boat. It was a lot of good work, and just good living came out of that space until it was sold. And Key West is a great literary community, and it has many great fine artists. But it's a tough place for fine artists, and it's a tough place because space is expensive, and fine art, painting, sculpture, all of that requires space. And it's a small sadness that there'd be a lot more artists here if there was some accessible spaces for them to work in, and that's critical. So that's my story. That's my story about Truman Annex. Was that what you were thinking, or did I?
Yes,
Yeah,
that was okay. I was thinking. And I know the studios of Key West is certainly trying to provide some space, but
they have
where they've been doing a great job. And
there's a couple great things. I mean, there's a lot of great things that are going on. I think the Tropic Cinema and Studios Key West were two really, and there's many more. I don't want to shortchange anybody, but those strike me as two really important kind of cultural anchors for Key West. Two of the really good things that have developed amongst many others, in the last few years. Yeah. And let me, I don't, why don't you read, why don't we do what we're doing? Do we have anything else? It's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
It's fun. Thank you. And I appreciate it. I wrangled John into this.
I was a little nervous.
You all out there in virtual world.
Yeah. Sculptors are just used to being, sculptors are used to being in big, dark rooms by themselves most of the time. So it was good for me to get out. And also, one thing I want to add about this book that I've been thinking is after a year of lockdown and of being isolated, it was so nice to have a book that was so full of life and so full of stories, and who would kind of get you out of your get you out of your isolation, your funk. All right, so they want to ask questions, but I want you to read your poem.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. I'm going to try and do it justice. This is Key Wasted by Larry Grossman. You expect me to believe what I perceive? Double-decker buses, lizard man, coat man, turkeys and things? A visual paradise paradox amongst an island of transients, all swept up in the southernmost part of a daydream. Conch turns to conch. Hey man to hey Bubba, what's happening? And a pulse rate that was stop the train and becomes who turned the engine off? Craftsmen, writers, has-been fighters, men of the sea, a spare change plea. Greyhound station, sloppy joes. Irrationally, that tends to grow. There's many places that I've tasted. It sure is easy to become key wasted.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the book, Rita. It's really, it's a gift. It's a gift to the community. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
And I guess we have questions now. I don't know.
Yes. So, so I'm Marcia Williams, and I'm going to present some questions from the audience. First of all, thank you very much, Rita and John. I just want you to know that the audience has enjoyed this immensely and really appreciate your being such a good storyteller. So thank you for this. So if we go back to the beginning, we have a question about how did Tennessee Williams, what did he do to change the ending of that play where Catherine says, did they cut the line? I procured it for her. People are interested in that.
Oh, well, he made it more obvious as to what happened. And you know what? If I can scoot out of here and you look here, I'm going to grab my change off the wall and actually read it to you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be quick.
There's
empty
nothing
chair.
like live Zoom.
Well,
Talk amongst yourselves.
I don't know where she ran off to.
I'm coming. I'm right here. I'm right
Okay.
here.
She's
I
coming
just,
back.
I just wanted to read you the actual change. I mean, it's a very small change. But so what he did was, my only reservation, he says, about Sunday through the eyes of the frozen look at the end suggests this to make it more fluid. He puts a couple commas in. And he says, when Catherine is counting backward, 99, 97, 95. And then he says, the doctor says, I think we ought at least to consider that the girl's story could be true. It's a small change, but it just leaves it open for that, what she is telling the truth. And then there's an invitation at the bottom. Would be happy to have you all at my house after the opening.
Oh, what are you reading from there, Rita?
Oh, I'm reading from this
that's
frame. I don't actually have the original, but this is a copy of the original note.
Uh-huh.
With
Terrific.
his, Tennessee Williams and his address and blah, blah. Yes.
Oh, good. So many people have asked the question of both of you, actually. So what have been the biggest changes since the times of the hippies and the altered minds of the 70s and 80s? And have those changes been for the good or for bad? So Rita?
Oh, gosh. Both for good and for bad. I mean, the town became prosperous, but we grew up. We sort of became adults. We had families. We raised kids. The town, a lot more commerce came to Key West. New restaurants, new shops, stuff like that. The tourism in the beginning, I think, was welcomed. I think right now people are taking, a step back, thinking maybe it's too much. The cruise ship issue is certainly a big issue right now, and our beautiful waters and what has happened to the waters off of the Keys, the only living reef that we have. And so it's been good and bad. John probably can answer this better than I.
I'm not sure you want to hear more. Actually touching upon a reef, I mean, culturally, the changes have been really dramatic. And like I said, Studios Key West, Tropic Cinema, the writers community, it's a lot of good stuff, but the changes on Duval Street, the absence, the loss of mom and pop business, local businesses. I think that mass tourism has, and it's in part, you're right. It's more prosperous. There's more money. People are making a living. I would prefer to see a little more balance and a little more sustainability. But the change, which to me is the saddest, is the condition of the offshore waters. That a reef that is so important and so beautiful can deteriorate in my lifetime, and it has, and it has to be recognized. I think that there's hope, but we are defenders of our environment, and I think that we've let the environment down a little bit with this sort of on just growth that's beyond what we can handle. We're a small island, so there are a lot of good things, and we're here, and I go swimming every day that I can, and I've got a wonderful place to work and wonderful friends. So it's good. It's good and bad. It's good and bad.
If you could bring back one place, one bar, one restaurant, one entertainment venue, what would it be?
Shorties.
Oh,
I don't
I'd have
know.
to say the Full Moon Saloon myself.
Oh, yes, and the Full Moon Saloon. Yes, absolutely. Maybe the chart room too, and the Monster.
Yeah, and happily we still have the Green Parrot. So, well, the Monster, or what was the Copa also was another. That was a moment, a brief moment. Yeah, but I would have to say the Full Moon.
And how was the music scene back in the 70s and 80s?
It was local. Most of there was just a couple bands. There was a couple venues. Sloppy Joe's was a venue, I think. Captain Tony's was probably, wouldn't you agree, Rita, the most popular venue for music?
Yeah, Captain Tony's.
For
Live
music.
For live music.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it would, Blue Heaven when it opened, and I mean, Jimmy Buffett played at Mallory Square, back in, I don't know, 74 maybe. It was really cold, I remember. And he was just getting started. I mean, at that time. And yeah.
But there was a couple of great, the Pacific Orchestra. There was 3 or 4 local bands that played a lot. And there wasn't, there was only a few venues. The Copa, when it opened, I think they had occasional live music shows. And there was I think there was a dance series out at the Tennessee Williams, but it wasn't the scene that we have now. And I don't know. I think the Parrot started later, which of course is the greatest music venue now.
Yes, Hearts of Palm and the Survivors. I see Jamie reminding me.
Oh, yeah, there you are, the Survivors.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I didn't mean to again shortchange anybody, but it was not nearly the scene that. Well, not. I mean, everything was miniature compared to what's today. I mean, in every sense.
So how do you see the arts continuing? The arts being music, theater, sculpture, whatever creative part it is, given the changes to the environment, the hurricanes, the lack of workers, and everything else that's impacting our small island?
I think the creative scene here is very vibrant at this point in time. I mean, we're getting, there's great music venues, Key West Theater and the Amphitheater and the studios at Key West and the other theaters, Red Barn, Waterfront, Tennessee Williams. I mean, I think everything is really, it's been difficult this past year, certainly with COVID and trying to do things virtually. And that has certainly been difficult, but as difficult as it is, you almost have to be somewhat established, I guess, to come here at this point, just because it's so expensive to be here. But I think it's a pretty vibrant artistic scene. John?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it would be really hard. I couldn't come here the way I came here when I came here. It would not be possible. And that's a sadness. I think that for the fine arts, there's Studios Key West, there's a very nice, there's more exhibition possibilities. There's a couple new galleries. I think Letty opening JAG Gallery was a big plus. We miss, of course, I was associated with Lucky Street for many, many years. And it was really, really interesting to watch that grow. And it went through a lot of different manifestations. So, and I think that of the generation of Jesse's generation, there's also some really nice local filmmakers and writers. And there's a creative generation that are here either by birth or by being friends of people that were born here. That they're established because they had family here, and that's really makes me happy, actually. So I think that there's a good future for the arts. Again, I'd like to think of this period, that this lockdown and this period would lead us to begin to reassess and to think about what the future of Key West is and what Key West deserves and what we deserve as a city, and our relationship to tourism and the importance of culture. you know, the native culture and the arts and you know, all the various cultures. So I really hope that this is a moment when we could kind of look deep and see where we're going, you know. And I think there's a feeling I think there's a feeling afoot that it's time for that.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Okay, we have one last question for Rita, and that's, do you see a play evolving from your book?
Oh my
Several people
God.
have asked that.
Oh, really? My
Yes.
God. Well, I see a reading, as we will do in November, a play. Yes, if somebody can consolidate it, I would certainly not be the person to write a play. I can't even read a play and know whether it's good or not. I said, oh, I'll do this part in this play. This is a great play. And it's not. And the ones that are really great, I'm going, oh no, that's no good. A movie, I could see, you know, a movie, TV series, of course, Bloodline kind of did it, but a play, sure, call me.
Who's going to play you, Rita?
Who would play me?
Right.
Yeah.
The word is out to the audience now. Whatever playwright can step up.
Right.
Okay. I'm now going to thank you again so much, Rita and John, for this really entertaining presentation. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Roberta Islip, President of the Friends.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just as a reminder to everyone watching, you're going to find links to purchase Rita's book, to join the Friends and donate to the Friends on our lecture series homepage. It's Friends of the Library, keywestlibrary.org. And don't forget that on March 29th, our final event of the season will feature Patricia Engel talking with Mark Powell. You won't want to miss it, and we look forward to seeing you here. Have a good night.